She laughed, while the clerk was still reading the charges. A breath of amusement. During her own case, Judge Caprio did not look up from the file until he heard her last name. It had started like any other morning in Providence Municipal Court. The lights buzzed, the flag hung still, and the benches were filled with people holding tickets between their fingers. A car at a hydrant, an inspection sticker months out of date, a registration someone kept meaning to renew. The judge moved through the docket with steady rhythm. Name, charge, a brief question, a brief answer, a decision. Next. A student late for class. A nurse who stayed too long outside the emergency entrance. A delivery driver with more tickets than hours of sleep. Nothing unusual. No one laughed. Then the clerk called the next case, and the back door closed with a heavy sound. A few heads turned. She walked in. Dark jeans, clean sneakers, a short jacket that looked like it cost more than most cars in the lot outside. One earbud still in, phone in hand, screen bright. She did not hurry. She moved through the aisle as if the space were waiting for her. At the microphone she stopped, glanced at the bench, then at the camera in the corner. Her thumb brushed the screen. The camera icon was already open. She kept the earbud in place and didn't bother with "Good morning." The clerk read the charges: improper parking on a narrow street, expired registration, failure to stop at a red light. Routine words this courtroom heard every day. On failure to stop, her shoulders lifted, and the little laugh escaped. Not loud, but clear enough for the people behind her to hear. An older man in the front row turned his head, frowning. No one said anything, but a question settled over the room. What, exactly, is funny? The clerk finished and read her full name. Then, as the form required, the name of her father. The judge's pen stopped. He didn't write. He didn't speak. The last name hung in the air a beat longer than the others. On the benches, two women exchanged a look. One leaned in, whispering, "Isn't that his daughter? The one from the news?" The words were soft, but the reaction was not. Backs straightened. Faces tightened. Judge Caprio set his pen down beside the file and raised his eyes above his glasses. Now he saw the angled phone, held not down at her side but outward, just enough to frame the seal on the wall and the man in the robe. It was the grip of someone saving a moment, not enduring it. She leaned slightly toward a young woman in the front row and, thinking the microphone still dead, murmured, "Save this. It's going to be a show." The microphone was already on. The sentence slipped into the room as clearly as any sworn answer. The sounds of the courtroom fell away. Judge Caprio heard every word. He took one breath and looked at her again. Not as just another name on a long list, but as someone standing at a crossroads she did not yet see. From that moment on, nothing about this case would be routine. And she was the person in the room who hadn't realized it. Her name was Lily Harrow, 22, a lifelong Providence resident. The clerk pronounced it crisply, but the room reacted to the next part. Daughter of Daniel Harrow, State Minister of Transportation. Not a cabinet figure, not a political titan, but a man whose face had spent years drifting in and out of local headlines. Overspending on contracts, a bridge repair scandal, whispers of favors traded for expedited permits. Nothing ever proven, nothing ever sticking. The kind of official Rhode Islanders know without knowing. Lily didn't flinch at the mention. She'd heard it her whole life. Judge Caprio studied her a moment longer, as if weighing how much of her story belonged to the man behind that title, and how much belonged to her alone. Her attitude wasn't born in a day. It came from a house where inconveniences were handled elsewhere, by someone else. Rules were things other people dealt with. At 9, she learned that a parking ticket is nothing. At 13, she learned that her father could make fines disappear because it wasn't worth their time. At 16, she watched him talk a trooper out of a citation without raising his voice. So now, standing under the state seal, she said something small but revealing. I honestly don't know why we're making a big deal out of this. Not cruel, not angry, just genuinely confused. As if the world had malfunctioned by asking her to answer for anything at all. But the judge didn't reply. He opened the folder again, reading the printed record that most defendants never see. 5 citations, 3 months, each one dismissed on a technicality. A registration mishap that was corrected by agency. A photo violation where image clarity insufficient. A municipal ticket voided due to a system update. Anyone else in the room would need a miracle for that kind of luck. She'd had a handful. Someone in the back whispered, "So that's why she's so sure of herself." But underneath Lily's posture, beneath the phone she kept lifting, the smirk she kept arranging, there was something tightly wound. Her thumb tapped the lock screen again and again. She didn't check social media. She checked the same thread, waiting for a message that didn't come. Her father hadn't texted, not once. Every few seconds her gaze flicked toward the courthouse doors, not toward the press, toward the possibility that he might walk in and see her. She wasn't afraid of fines. She was afraid of him finding out she'd drawn attention. In the second row, a woman around 60 leaned forward, squinting. Her voice, low but firm, drifted through the room. That's her. She blocked the school lane last spring. Kids had to walk around her car. I remember her laughing when a teacher asked her to move. The remark wasn't meant for the judge, but it reached him all the same. He had heard similar stories before. Moments where entitlement created danger in ordinary places. He pressed his lips together, a quiet acknowledgement. Something deeper was taking shape. Lily finally noticed the shift, the way silence had settled, the way eyes had sharpened. She straightened, almost defensive, as though the room had changed the rules without warning. But the truth was simpler. The smirk had cracks in it now. And neither she nor the judge realized that the real reason for that crack, the real source of her laughter, of her bravado, of her fear, would become visible only a moment later, when the first real question broke the surface. Judge Caprio adjusted his glasses, not with irritation, but with the practiced calm of someone preparing to peel back a layer others had missed. "Miss Harrow," he began, his tone even, "were you personally driving the vehicle on the date in question?" She answered too quickly. "No." No hesitation. No thought. Just the reflex of someone accustomed to being shielded. The judge nodded lightly, as if expecting the answer. He flipped a page in the file and slid a photograph forward. It wasn't dramatic, no crash, no chase, just the intersection camera's snapshot. A compact car rolling through a very red light. Clear daylight, clear road, and a clear image of the driver. "Curious," he said, "because the footage shows someone who looks remarkably like you." A ripple passed through the benches. Not judgment. Recognition. The kind of quiet sound people make when a truth reveals itself without being spoken. Lily's eyes flashed, but only for a second. "That could have been my friend," she said, shrugging. "We share the car sometimes." Caprio lifted his chin slightly. "Your friend? Driving a vehicle registered to the Department of Transportation?" The room tightened. A father with a toddler shifted forward. A pair of retirees leaned in without realizing it. The silence wasn't hostile. It was heavy. For the first time, Lily's posture faltered. Barely, but enough to see the calculation behind her eyes. She wasn't out of control. She was deciding how far to lean on the old script. Then, astonishingly, she smiled wider. "Judge," she said softly, almost amused, "I don't see how that matters." It wasn't arrogance alone. It was the reflex of someone who had never been required to connect her choices with consequences. But in this room, with these people, it landed like a door slammed in their faces. A murmur rolled across the back row. A man stood, middle-aged, sleeves rolled, the look of someone who didn't come to court to make trouble. Someone who had simply carried a moment too long. "Your Honor," he said, breath tight with nerves, "I saw her that day." The bailiff shifted, ready to intervene, but the judge lifted a hand, a small gesture that said, "Let him speak for a moment." "She flew through that light like nothing was there," the man continued. "My daughter was crossing. She froze on the curb. Another step and—" His voice caught. He sat down before finishing. Lily stared at him, not angry, stunned. It was as if his words introduced a version of events she hadn't considered. The part where someone else existed on the road. The judge closed the folder slowly. Not dramatic. Deliberate. He looked from the man to Lily, and then to the screen showing the intersection photo. The room felt different now. Not outraged. Alert. The judge's voice dropped. Quiet, but firm. "We're no longer discussing an inconvenience, Miss Harrow. We are discussing a moment where someone's child could have been harmed." Heat rose in the space, not from anger, but from collective understanding. The sense in the room shifted from annoyance at her attitude to something more serious. This case wasn't routine. It never was. And the judge knew, with absolute clarity, that letting it pass as one of those things would be a mistake he could never justify. What surprised him, and everyone else, was that the next detail he uncovered would make the entire picture even darker. Judge Caprio lifted the folder again, not to intimidate her, but because something on the page hadn't sat right since he'd first glanced at it. He turned one sheet, then another, comparing the printed records with the photograph on the screen. His brow tightened, slightly, but enough for those who knew him to recognize he'd spotted an inconsistency. The license plate in the camera photo was not the same as the plate currently registered to the vehicle. One letter off. A single character changed. Not scraped, not misread, different. And the date of the change? 2 days after the red light violation. The courtroom grew still, as if the air itself paused to listen. The judge spoke gently, almost conversationally. "Miss Harrow, were you aware that the plate assigned to this vehicle was altered shortly after the incident?" Her response wasn't rehearsed this time. "What? No. No, I didn't touch anything." For the first time, her tone cracked. Thin, uneven, a note of genuine confusion replacing her earlier poise. Caprio didn't push. He let the silence expand, giving her space to answer honestly if she wished. She didn't. Instead, she looked around, not defiant, but lost. The confidence she'd worn like armor slid off abruptly, revealing something younger, thinner, unprepared beneath it. He continued, voice steady. "Then who authorized the change? A family member? A department official? Someone must have made the request." She swallowed, eyes fixed on the floor. I don't know, but—" She hesitated, struggling with whether to say the next words aloud. "It's not the first time something's been changed without telling me." That sentence drifted into the stillness like a confession pulled from a deeper place. One she had never meant to expose. A few people shifted in their seats. The older woman, who had recognized her earlier, leaned back slowly, as if pieces of a larger picture were falling into place. Caprio studied Lily's expression, seeing something he hadn't seen in the earlier grin or the tilted phone. Fear. Not of the courtroom, of the invisible machinery behind her, the one she'd grown up inside without understanding how it worked. "When did that start?" the judge asked quietly. She shook her head. "I don't know. My dad just handles things. I get a notice, then it disappears. A ticket, then it's void. I thought that was normal." A hollow statement, not defensive but resigned. The voice of someone who had never been taught what accountability looked like. Caprio folded his hands. "Miss Harrow, whether you intended it or not, these changes create the appearance that someone intervened to erase your mistakes." Her breath caught. The word erase seemed to strike deeper than she expected. The judge continued. "And if that's the case, this isn't about a red light. This is about understanding your own responsibility, apart from anyone else's influence." The edges of her composure frayed. For the first time, she wasn't performing for her camera or for the room. She wasn't smiling, wasn't posturing. She looked young and very, very alone. The judge leaned forward just slightly, not to intimidate, but to be certain she heard him. "You're not here for your father's choices. You're here for your own." Her eyes lifted toward him, startled by the simplicity of the statement, and by the weight behind it. In that fragile silence, the courtroom seemed to recognize a shift. This wasn't a clash anymore. It was the beginning of a reckoning she had never experienced, and in that moment, that precise second, the smirk she'd worn since walking through the door finally vanished. Judge Caprio didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The quiet in the courtroom was already sharper than anything volume could achieve. He clasped his hands on the bench, leaned back slightly, and spoke with the calm gravity that had steadied thousands of defendants before her. "Miss Harrow," he said, "I've sat here long enough to know that a single careless moment on the road can rewrite a family's life forever." He didn't give her a lecture. He gave her truth. He told her about the parents he'd seen standing where she stood, not because of a fine, but because a child had been struck by someone who didn't think a second mattered. He recalled a young mother he met years earlier who lost her son to a driver who rolled a light just like hers. He recounted, without drama, how quickly a routine morning becomes a lifetime of grief. "These cases stay with me," he said softly, "because the victims never saw the car coming. They trusted the world to slow down for a red light." Every person in the room felt the words land. They weren't aimed at humiliation. They were aimed at awakening. Then came the line that cut directly into the heart of the silence. "I'm not concerned about the violation," he said. "I'm concerned that you laughed when you could have taken someone's child from them." No one moved. Even Lily breathed differently. Shallow, uneven. Her fingers tightened around the phone she no longer dared to lift. She tried to speak, but her voice trembled before the words formed. I didn't mean—" She stopped, tried again. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know you won't believe me, but I am." The room didn't soften. Not yet. The apology didn't erase months of entitlement, or the smirk she wore only minutes before. The older woman in the second row, the one who remembered the school lane, spoke without standing. "Being sorry is easy. Listening is the hard part." Lily closed her eyes, absorbing the sting. It wasn't cruel. It was simply the kind of truth she'd never been forced to hear. Just then, her phone vibrated in her hand. She glanced down. A message from her father. Journalists are outside. Don't say anything stupid. Not, are you okay? Not, what happened? Just pressure. Image. Damage control. The tiny screen illuminated the very thing the judge had sensed from the beginning. The invisible grip that shaped her fear, her bravado, her confusion. A life where consequences were handled, not learned. She raised her eyes slowly. Caprio saw the shift, a small but unmistakable recognition that she couldn't hide behind that influence here. "Your father isn't in this room," he said gently, "and he cannot answer for you." For a long second, she didn't move. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. Not to please him, not to perform, but because something inside her finally clicked into place. The judge exhaled. "Miss Harrow," he said, "a monetary fine won't teach you anything. You'd forget it in an hour." A beat. The room braced. "So, here is my ruling. 40 hours of community service at the elementary school where this incident occurred. You'll assist staff during arrival and dismissal. You'll see what it means when others trust drivers to slow down." Her mouth parted, not to protest, but because the sentence hit deeper than she expected. It wasn't punishment. It was confrontation with the real-world cost of her carelessness. Caprio added one final sentence, quiet but resonant. "Let the children teach you what you missed." The decision didn't spark applause. It didn't need to. The emotion filling the room was something steadier, heavier. The sense that a turning point had just been set in motion. And in that precise moment, with the ruling still echoing in the hushed chamber, Lily Harrow realized this case wasn't closing on her. It was opening. The ruling settled over the courtroom like a slow exhale. No one rushed to gather their things. No one whispered. It was the kind of silence that follows truth. Heavy, clarifying, unexpectedly human. Lily stood at the microphone, hands clasped together, her phone finally lowered to her side. The bright screen dimmed, then went dark. Something in her posture, the lifted chin, the shield of nonchalance, had dissolved completely. What remained was a young woman trying to understand the weight of a moment she hadn't walked into prepared for. People on the benches watched her with mixed expressions, some relieved, some cautious. A few, especially the older ones, looked at her the way you'd look at someone standing at the beginning of a long overdue lesson. Not with contempt, with hope wrapped in doubt. She stepped back from the microphone. The bailiff gestured toward the aisle. She nodded and turned, a little slower, a little less sure-footed than before. At the door, she paused. Then she did something no one expected. She turned around. Her voice, when it came, was quiet enough that those in the back had to lean forward to catch it. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said. "I didn't realize things like this could change a person." A breath. "But I think they already have." It wasn't polished. It wasn't performed. It sounded like a sentence spoken by someone who had just stepped out of her father's shadow for the first time and was startled by the daylight. Judge Caprio didn't answer right away. He studied her, really studied her, and the faint, unsteady sincerity in her face. Then he offered a singular nod. Nothing more, nothing less. From the second row, the older woman who had confronted her earlier lifted her chin. "I hope you mean it," she said softly. Lily didn't flinch. She didn't roll her eyes. She didn't retreat into herself. "I hope so too," she replied, and the honesty in those 4 words landed with more impact than any apology could. She turned once more and pushed open the door leading outside. The winter light spilled in, cold and sharp. A cluster of reporters stood just beyond the steps, microphones angled, cameras already recording. Normally, she would have rushed past them. shielding herself behind her hair, her phone, her father's status. But she didn't. She stopped at the top stair. The microphones swung toward her like a flock of birds. A reporter fired the first question. "Miss Harrow, do you have a statement about the judge's ruling?" She lifted her gaze, steadier than before, and spoke a single sentence. Not for headlines, not for spin, but because she finally understood the difference between attention and accountability. "Today taught me more than my last 22 years, she said. "The rest will take time." The reporters froze. It wasn't the answer they expected, or the one they could twist. Inside, behind the tall windows of the courtroom, Judge Caprio stood for a moment watching her through the glass. His expression wasn't triumphant. It was thoughtful, tired in the way only justice that tries to be humane can make a man tired. Someone behind him asked if they should call the next case. He didn't look away from the window as he responded. "If everyone who walked in here left with that much honesty," he murmured, barely above a whisper, "we'd have far less work to do." And just like that, he returned to the bench, reopening the next file. Another name, another story, another chance for truth to find someone who didn't know they needed it. Some smiles vanish because of punishment. The rare ones vanish because someone finally told them the truth.